you gotta do is look for the bare necessities, the simple bare necessities. Forget about your worries and your strife. I mean the bare necessities are Mother Nature's recipes that bring the bare necessities of life.
Okay. So, hi everyone. The idea of being raised by a Black Panther with an English accent whilst learning your bare necessities seems an awful lot cooler than being brought up by human parents. There are, however, some very rare and tragic cases in which the so-called Mowgli syndrome is a reality. In 2008, a 7-year-old boy, quickly dubbed Bird Boy by the media, was found in a small apartment in Russia, surrounded by macaws, budgies, parakeets, and the like. Apparently, from the moment he was born, his mother had not treated him as her son, but as one of her pet birds. Consequently, the boy grew up to believe that he was in fact a pet bird. He ate the food that birds ate, he shat where the birds shat, he chirped just like the birds did. In 2009, again in Russia, police were on the hunt for the so-called werewolf boy after he escaped from a Moscow clinic just days after being rescued from the wild. The boy, thought to be in his mid-teens, was found in a remote region of central Russia and displayed alarmingly wolverine characteristics. He ate the food that wolves ate. He slept where the wolves slept. He snarled just like the wolves did. Apparently, he'd lived with the wolves for so long that he had come to believe that he was in fact a wolf. And I mention these cases, weird as they are, because they demonstrate that the environment in which a person lives affects what a person believes. Now, some of you, sadly, have experienced the negative side of this phenomenon. The reason that you today believe yourself to be stupid, bothersome, ugly, and clumsy is because at some point in your life you found yourself in an environment that told you those things for so long that you came to believe them. Others of you, more happily, have experienced the positive side of this phenomenon. The reason that you today believe yourself to be capable and lovable and useful is because at one point in your life you found yourself in an environment where those things were reinforced. You came to believe them to be true, and good for you. But one way or another, the environment in which a person lives affects the things that a person believes about him or herself. And that is of interest to me, because I, like you, live in a relatively Christian environment. That is, I believe in Jesus. I own a Bible. I attend a church. I hang out with Christian friends. I try to say my prayers. Do you know what I mean? The environment that I'm surrounded with is kind of Christian. And the hard challenge of the text we're going to look at this morning is that perhaps in reality, I am no more Christian than Bird Boy was a bird, or Werewolf Boy was a wolf. And if that is the case, then perhaps the Christian environment that I'm surrounded by is actually a bad thing, because it's got me convinced that I'm something I'm not. So that's the tough talk of this morning's study. Before we get to that, let's have a wee look at an image of the Virgin Mary. Very nice. Now, as images of Mary go, icons anyway, this one is fairly typical. So notice the devout, pious expression on her face. Notice also that she's closely connected here with baby Jesus. So the not too subtle message of this image is that the Virgin Mary is a devout woman, and she is about as connected to Jesus as anyone can be. And I should say that this understanding of Mary is an ancient one. There's strong evidence to suggest that in the early church, even when she was still alive, Mary was held in the very highest of regard, that the unquestioned assumption is that Jesus and Mary were very tight. Mary was Jesus' biggest supporter, biggest fan, which makes this morning's episode in Mark's Gospel fascinating. In Mark chapter 3 and verse 20, Jesus is in a house with his disciples doing his thing. Mark says that when his family, Mary, brothers, sisters, whatever, heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, he's out of his mind. Interesting. So what's going on in this sentence is that Jesus' immediate family have heard about Jesus being a preacher and all that. And in response to what they've heard, they visit him. And they do so with this kind of scenario in mind. This is what they're thinking. You see, the phrase "take charge" in the New Testament is only ever used in ancient documents to describe what happens when one person takes away another person's freedom. So you see, at this point in the story, Mary isn't Jesus' biggest fan. Quite the contrary. She believes him to be, how does she put it, out of his mind, which in the ancient world is a euphemism for demonic possession. And because that's what she believes, she wants to put her own son in a straitjacket for his own protection. And what Mary is doing here, I think, is perfectly natural for a mother to want to do. If you believed that your child had severe mental issues, you would do whatever you had to do to help your child in any way that you could. And if you believed that your child was in some danger to himself, you would perhaps sanction having your child committed to some sort of facility or another. So we were brought up with this view of Mary where she's a very devout woman. She's very closely connected to Jesus and a big fan of her son. And yet here we have a bizarre story in the Bible that says Mary thought Jesus to be so mentally disturbed, so demonically possessed, that he needed to be put in a padded cell for his own protection. Okay, so put that bizarre image at the back of your mind and let's move on to the next sentence, verse 22, which says that some of the teachers of the law came down from Jerusalem. Now, so far in the story, Jesus has had a very vocal, very public ministry. He tended to attract large crowds, and in front of those large crowds, he tended to do very dramatic things. And because he did all that stuff out in the open, these teachers of the law are sent out from the headquarters of Judaism, the temple in Jerusalem, to investigate Jesus. And the point of their investigation is to come up with some definitive opinion on this Jesus character. Their assignment is, here we hear this stuff about this preacher who's saying things and doing things, and he's pulling in big numbers, so we need you to go and ask around, take your notebooks, take your tape recorders, and find out what you can about this character, because we need to know who he is and what he's up to and where he's from, etc., etc. And the opinion that they formulate concurs with that of Mary. Having done their investigation, they said, he is possessed by Beelzebub, and therefore by the prince of demons, he is driving out demons. So what's happening here is that the investigators, the religious experts, have been asking around, and they've discovered that thus far Jesus has been behaving as though he were some kind of an exorcist. And this is controversial, because in the ancient world, people believed that there was a close connection between the natural and the supernatural. So, for example, thus far in the story, Jesus has been going from village to village, and those villages have been predominantly poor, and they were poor because of the system. You know, the Romans, the taxes, the corrupt government, so on and so forth. The kind of system where an ordinary working person could never, ever, ever win because everything was always stacked against them. And it was believed by ordinary people that that system in which they lived and worked was a reflection of something sinister going on in the supernatural world. In fact, it was believed that any bad luck at all was a reflection of something that happened in the supernatural world. And Jesus, in his role as an exorcist, stood up to that and said, I'm against all that. I'm fighting all that. And for that reason, a prominent feature of his ministry was that he went out of his way to help those who saw themselves as being demonically possessed. And so you'll perhaps remember from chapter 1 of the story that his very first miracle and his very first day at work was performing an exorcism. And when we read that story, we discovered that that exorcism was largely symbolic. It was Jesus' way of saying, this is what my ministry is going to be all about. I have come to destroy the works of the devil wherever they are to be found. I'm here to rescue people from the evil that so readily messes up their lives. And these religious investigators from headquarters in Jerusalem can't deny that Jesus has been doing just that. From every village, they've heard story after story about some guy who used to sit semi-naked on the street corner, shouting crazy obscenities at passers-by. And then there's this story about how this guy met Jesus, and suddenly his life turned around, and he was wearing clothes and holding down a job and supporting a family and all that kind of thing. Some of these rescue stories that they would have uncovered in the course of their investigation were of such a dramatic and public nature that their occurrence would have been regarded as fact. And so when you read through the Gospels, you remember, that there's more evidence to suggest that Jesus behaved as an exorcist than there is about many of the other aspects of his life that we take for granted, such as his birth in Bethlehem or his career as a carpenter. So what's being contested in this religiously motivated investigation is not the reality of what Jesus is doing. It is the meaning of what Jesus is doing. And so having investigated Jesus, they conclude that Jesus is pulling in big numbers, and he is doing some good. He is rescuing people from evil, but he's only able to do so because he's evil himself. This is what his industry peers are saying about him. And so they agree with his mother. Jesus is possessed by Beelzebub. The word Beelzebub, very strange word, is a compound word made up of two words. The word Baal, which is a Canaanite word for Lord or God, and the word Zebub, which is a Canaanite word for ruler. So Baal-Zebub is Baal the ruler. Here is a Bronze Age image of him, early Canaanite deity. Those of you who've read the Old Testament will know that for much of Israel's history, the poets and the prophets and the preachers regarded this deity as being the great arch enemy of God. And so by the time of the New Testament, some 1300 years later, this name Baal became synonymous with the devil. So here, listen, here's the official verdict on Jesus. Here's what his annual review says. A review given by the central religious authorities in Jerusalem. We recognize he's pulling in the numbers. We recognize he seems to be helping people and delivering them from evil. But he is, in fact, in league with the devil. And you can just hear his mother in the background saying, I knew it. Ever since I found him pulling the head of his G.I. Joe when he was 4, I knew there was something strange about that kid. Something not right about him. So now you have Mary, his mother, the members of his own family, and the religious experts of his day, all saying that he is demonically possessed, out of his mind, and needs to be put in a padded cell for his own protection. Let's step out of the text for a moment and consider what Jesus is dealing with here. In this story, Jesus is at the beginning of his career. In this story, he's just a few months earlier branched out on his own. Now, when you do something big, something difficult, from whom do you expect a little bit of support? Your family. From whom would you like a little bit of affirmation? Your peers. the leaders in your particular industry. And I draw your attention to that because I want those of you to know what it's like to live without the support of your family or the affirmation of your peers, that Jesus gets it. Jesus understands. Jesus experienced not only the absence of support from those he loved, but also the presence of hostility. And when those you love and respect tell you that you are wrong, and that you're mental, and that you need to stop doing what you're doing, the great danger for you is that you can start to believe that you are wrong, and that you are mental, and that you ought to stop doing what it is you're doing. Does any of this sound vaguely familiar to any of you? Can any of you relate to these sort of sayings? It'll never work. You're not good enough. There's no way you'll make it. You'll never pass. Here we go again. This is just another one of your stupid ideas. And on those days, you need every ounce of your strength to believe in yourself and to reject the lies that people close to you would have you believe. So follow the example of Jesus, please. Having been told by the people who knew him best, and by the people who knew the most, that he was mentally unwell and possessed by an ancient Canaanite deity, he stands his ground with a little bit of logic. So he questions his questioners. He says to them, okay, Einstein, how can Satan drive out Satan? Simple logic, really. If this ministry is a public rescuing of people whose lives are ruined by evil, how can he be evil himself? The point being that for Satan to dismantle the work of Satan would be for Satan to work at cross purposes with Satan. It doesn't make any sense. By the way, a surefire sign that you're dealing with a negative, life-stealing form of religion is when it doesn't make any sense. Do you ever have people say something to you religiously and you're like, what? And they respond as though you're the stupid one. That's a surefire sign you're onto something there. Okay, anyway. In verse 27, Jesus quotes from a saying that was widely known at the time. He says, in fact, no one can enter a strong man's house and carry off his stuff unless he first ties up the strong man, then he can rob his house. Now, this strange saying comes from a well-known story, very popular at the time of Jesus, called the Testament of Levi. It's a Jewish book, and I'll quote you the line. There we go. The Testament of Levi says that Beliar, this is a Jewish name for Satan, shall be bound by the Messiah and shall grant to his children the authority to trample on evil spirits. So this is a Jewish way of saying that when the Messiah comes, he's not going to pussyfoot around evil. He's not going to collude with evil. He will in fact confront it head on, wherever, whenever he can. And the reason that Jesus alludes to this well-known Jewish saying is because he's making the point, this is what I do, silly. My entire ministry that you say is satanic or evil is the opposite of that. I confront evil, I attack evil. I'm all about undoing its effects and making its work far harder than it needs to be as often as I can. Now there's a lesson in this. Sometimes in life, you have to listen to your critics. Because sometimes your critics see something in you that you don't see in yourself, or that you are blind to. Sometimes. And that's good. However, sometimes you need to trust yourself. Listen to your own gut. Sometimes you need to say to your critics, no, I'm sorry, but you're wrong. And I'm not listening. Listen. Everyone else is not an expert on your life. And when you allow your life to be governed by their opinions, you're actually just being lazy. It's your life. Think about it for yourself. Take responsibility for it yourself. Listen to others, but don't be governed by them. Be strong. Anyway, just as Jesus is telling his critics that they can shove their criticisms where Paddy put his peanuts, his mother and his brother arrived, straitjacket in hand. It's nice. And standing outside, they sent someone to call him. A crowd was sitting round Jesus, and they told him, "Your mother and brothers are outside looking for you." Now in this verse there are two groups of people. There are a group of people who are inside and they're sitting, and there are a group of people outside and they're looking. Inside, sitting, outside, looking. Now in the Gospels, the word looking is always a negative word. It means looking for the purposes of controlling. And the word sitting, when used in this way, means sitting and soaking up and taking in everything that Jesus has to say. So the people who are inside and sitting, they get Jesus. They don't think he's mental. They don't think he's dark and sinister. They don't think he's out of his mind. They think he's amazing. And they want to listen to him and learn from him and follow him best they can. And yet the people who are outside, his own family, the religious experts, the people who know the Bible inside out, they want to shut Jesus up. This, friends, is the gospel. The people who shouldn't get it, people I think rather like you, people who've lived the kind of life you've lived and made the kind of mistakes that you've made and done the kind of things you've done and struggled with the kind of things that you struggle with. The people who shouldn't get it, they get it. But the people who should get it, they don't. They miss it. This irony isn't lost on Jesus, who then says, I imagine with a very Gallic shrug on his shoulders, "Who are my mother and brothers?" Then he looks at those seated in the circle around him, strangers to him. He says, "These are my mother and brothers. For whoever does God's will is my mother and my brother." Now we know from other parts of the story that Jesus was crazy about his family. And so when he says this, he's not being dismissive of them. All he wants to do is reflect on the irony of what's going on in this bizarre episode. And so he's raising this question to get everyone to think about the irony of what's going on. I mean, you would assume, wouldn't you, that if anyone on earth would have gotten Jesus, it would have been his mother. After all, you'd have assumed that the whole angel of the Lord, virgin which shall be with child, shepherds watching their flocks by night, 3 wise men bringing their gifts from afar episode would have made some impression on her. No? Apparently not. She who knew all that she didn't get it. The only people who got it at this point were religiously illiterate strangers. And I think that the irony of this must make us question some of our assumptions, because we, like Mary, have been living with Jesus for a long time. We, like Mary, think that we know him. That's the great arrogant sentence of the evangelical church, isn't it? I know Jesus. Really? We, like Mary, think that we understand, and when it comes to the whole God, faith, religion, following Jesus thing, we assume rather a lot. But take the religious investigators in the story. These are people who came from the heart of the establishment. To get to where they were in life, they had to be experts. They had to have put in the long hours of study that their status required. And being experts, they naturally assumed that they knew God. They assumed that they properly understood the story of the Bible and its meaning and its purpose and all that. But But they didn't get what Jesus was about, and so they remained outside the circle with Jesus' family. And yet sitting in the circle around Jesus on the inside, loaded term, are a group of people who are religiously dull and who have no filial connection to Jesus. People who have no reason at all to assume anything of God. And yet it is this group who gets it and who wants to follow him. And I find the irony in this story quite unsettling and quite useful. Most of us grew up with the trappings of Christianity. Confession, Mass, having a Bible in the house, going to church, all that stuff. And those trappings were, and I suppose still are, a part of our life. And so we naturally assume a great deal about where we are with the whole God, faith, Jesus thing. And this story forces us to examine, question even, those assumptions. The group that this story portrays in a positive light are the people who sit and who learn. These are people who would make no claim to be religious experts. They would make no claim to be close to Jesus. These are people who you would never hear say, I know Jesus, and I understand the Bible, and I'm a good Christian, and all that stuff. These are not people who would wear their religion on their sleeves. These are just people who know enough to know that they need Jesus, that they want to learn more about what he has to say, and they want to follow him best they can. I think that these are a group of people who hear the stuff Jesus is selling and they see it as a this could change everything kind of product. This could transform my past, my present, and my future. And they want to be part of it. And so if I could see myself in this story, and it's a good way to read the Bible to see where you would fit into the characters and the main protagonists and so on. If I could see myself in this story, I think I'd rather be the person who would not presume to say, I know Jesus. I think I'd rather be the person who would not presume to say, I know what the Bible says on every subject and every situation. I think I'd rather be the person who says, I know nothing. Nothing, that is, except I need Jesus. I don't want to do life without him. And whatever this man is selling, I'm buying. I'm buying. 10 minutes. We haven't done questions in a while. Anyone got any questions? And let's get back into that. Yes. Okay, so the question is, how old was Jesus when he started his career? Yeah, okay, so best guess is he was about 30. 30. And his career lasted for 3 years. So,
I thought
best guess is 33. They say that because rabbis, and Jesus behaved as a rabbi, and he's spoken about by the characters in the Bible using the vocabulary of the rabbi. And rabbis typically in the first century began their career properly at the age of 30. And there was about a 15-year apprenticeship. And then at the end of your 15 years, you could branch out on your own and start up your own rabbi school or rabbi ministry. So Jesus probably was 30 when he started his career, and his career went very well at the beginning, but it went downhill pretty quickly, and got killed, which is not a good way to end your career. I suppose that makes me feel better about how mine's been going. But yes, shout out, Gina.
You've been studying demonic possession.
Yes.
Do you think it's possible that something like that took place with Mary? Did she forget her virgin birth? Do you think that something like that is possible where the devil possesses someone, perhaps in a milder form? Otherwise, righteous people who know the Bible inside out, it blinds them temporarily so they don't see the obvious.
Well, I don't think we need to talk about the supernatural to talk about stuff that spoils our lives and stuff that we're blind to. I mean, the fact is, every single person in this room is blind to issues that they need to deal with. Come on. Every single one of us are ignoring stuff that we need to fix. So that's just our human nature, I think. And I think it requires an enormous amount of bravery to look at yourself in the mirror and say, there's stuff I need to deal with. So that, if you like, is a form of exorcism. It's dealing with your demons. Verging slightly into the supernatural, only slightly, I think that the most typical work of evil isn't in the form of possession or anything grand like that. It's in the simple stuff. It's in the temptation. It's in the knocking you down. It's in the little things that go on to make you and I as human beings less than we could be. And then at the further end of the extreme, well, then we can talk about possessions and exorcisms. But I think that evil is all around us. I think that evil is in us. And yes, one of the things it does, it makes us blind to the stuff we need to see. Right? We need to deal with our stuff, people. Oh, I'm going to stop there. No, I need to stop. That depressed what I just said. Too much to do now. Okay. I'm going to be transparent here. See, one of the differences that I'm experiencing here at LifePoint. For a large part of my career, especially in the last 2 or 3 years when things were hard, I would go to church on a Sunday and I would try and hide in my office, and I would find it very, very difficult to speak to people. Here at LifePoint, I find myself leaving church on a Sunday feeling totally the opposite. I'm saying, damn, I never got to speak to him, and I never got to speak to her, and I wish I did. It's a good thing. Love being with you. Love being with you. However, the Scottish Cup final's on this afternoon, so I can't stay until. Let's pray. Father in heaven, lover and knower of our hearts, may we never be numbered among those who claim to know everything there is to know about you. May we not be numbered among those who claim to live perfectly. May we be numbered among those who make no claim at all, save that is that we need you. And we trust you. We cast ourselves and our families upon you. And we ask you for your help in all the ways of our lives. Be with us then this week, I pray. In Jesus' name.